Hello and welcome to this session of GETDigital. My name is Abdel Salam Salim and I'm Assistant Professor in Digital Business here at DCU Business School. And I'm delighted to be your MC for this session. So throughout this week in GETDigital, we will be exploring a range of topics related to business, leadership, and entrepreneurship, with particular focus on how businesses at all stages and of all sizes can harness transformational digital technology to achieve their business goals. So turning to this session now, I'm very pleased to introduce our speaker, Mark Congiusta, Senior User Experience Manager at Amazon, who will be talking today about caveat emptor, beware poorly designed selling experience. So to our audience, we'd love to receive your questions. So please submit them during the session using the Q&A function, which you'll find it at the bottom of the screen. Please be aware that the chat function is disabled, so please only use the Q&A option. We will then compile all the questions, and I'll ask Mark to address as many as he can in the time that we have available. So we're looking forward to your questions. Please remember to use the Q&A function as the chat is disabled. So with no further delay, I'll hand you over to Mark.
Thanks, Salam. Appreciate it. All right, let me share my screen. Okay. All right. Well, hello, everyone. I am on the East Coast of the United States, so it's a little bit earlier in my day than it is for you guys, but I'm excited to be here and talk to you about e-commerce UX design. So when I was first asked to present to you guys, I was under a little bit of pressure to come up with an idea. And as you can tell from my well-designed title slide here, I'm kind of a design guy. You know, I don't want to brag, but I'm pretty good. And I said, well, you know what I'll do is I will talk to everyone about how user experience manifests itself in the e-commerce process, right? And I got this creative flash of inspiration. I will use the caveat emptor, buyer beware, Latin phrase, and I will build upon that through the aid of Google Translate, and we'll talk about poorly designed selling experiences and what people need to know in order to deliver well-designed selling experiences. But after I started going through the process of building out the presentation, I realized I had about 10 things that I wanted to share with you. So one second, there we go. So I said, well, I have 10 commandments essentially of e-commerce UX, but I wanted to rationalize the difference between my initial idea and my new idea. So I was raised Roman Catholic, and Latin and 10 commandments, Roman Catholic Church. So this will be the listicle Tridentine Mass of e-commerce UX. If you weren't raised Roman Catholic, if you're not in the church anymore like I'm not, don't feel afraid. You'll still be able to follow along, and it will not be given in Latin, although there is some Latin later on, but we'll cover that. So just to get started, who am I? Why should you care about me? What I'm about to tell you. So Mark Congiusta, been a design leader for about 20 plus years, been building UX teams in all different types of design environments, architecture, product, web, advertising, animation, all different stuff. Currently working at Amazon. I actually lived in Ireland for a number of years, both in Dublin and Galway. And you can tell that's true because I didn't pronounce it Galway. Worked in advertising in Dublin and then joined Cisco Systems in Galway. And then eventually came back to the United States about 6 or 7 years ago. I still have a lot of friends over there, love it over there. Big fan of Ireland, and worked on e-commerce in all of the different areas that I've worked in my career. Currently, obviously at Amazon, a lot of e-commerce going on there. So I know what I'm talking about. So just to get kicked off, we'll spend a fair bit of time diving into a lot of detail and hardcore data, justifying that people do in fact buy things online. I'm kidding, of course. We all know, especially in this crazy world that we live in, where you take your life in your hands just walking out your front door, that people are buying stuff online and are increasingly buying more and more stuff online. And they're doing it everywhere. It's not just a US or European thing, like literally everywhere in the world. People are leveraging e-commerce to buy things. And e-commerce is no longer just a local or just a single country proposition. You're selling globally. In Amazon, we service pretty much the whole globe. We have sales channels in I think 12 or 13 different countries, like domain specific channels, and we're expanding that every week, and that's growing very quickly for us. But we have buyers and sellers everywhere in the world. We service every currency in the world, and that's, if you really want to build a business online, it's not just about the people in your area. It is about everyone everywhere who have access to your stuff, and they're doing it on all different types of devices as well. So that's something to keep in mind. So I don't know if any of you have ever seen this. This is called the Amazon flywheel. Jeff Bezos, this is his back of the napkin sketch where Amazon.com came from. Very important piece of Amazon lore. And it's really interesting because it kind of very simply sketches out what the idea behind e-commerce from Amazon's perspective and in general should be. For the purposes of this talk, we are just going to focus on this one piece, this customer experience piece, which in and of itself is huge, right? You could spend months, if not years, just analyzing that. But let's talk a little bit about nomenclature, right? Because a lot of the terminology around this can be confusing. So CX is a very large bucket of information and processes and features. The customer experience can involve everything from advertising. How do you get people aware of your product and service? So that's SEO, SEM, offline marketing, digital marketing, social media marketing. The sales function. How do you fulfill orders? How do you take orders? Customer service. How do you respond to requests or comments from customers? So it's basically the end-to-end life cycle from the time you start looking for a product till the time you actually receive it in your hands, and even beyond then in many cases. So a subsection of that is user experience, and user experience is generally focused on what are the tools and services that actually the customer interacts with in a real way. So for example, a e-commerce website is a great example of a user experience, and the user experience is made up of different workflows and methodologies, mechanisms that customers can do investigative research on what types of products they want to buy, and then actually go through the steps of making the purchase. And then a subset of that is the user interface, right? And a lot of times you'll hear, and people in my profession get very, very antsy when they hear this, that UX equals UI. It definitely does not. UI is a subset of that. And the user interface is what is the look and feel of those experiences? How do they manifest themselves for the end user? So customer experience, we're going to focus on the user experience and to a lesser extent, the UI part of that user experience. Okay, so all right, so I'm at Amazon, and there is quite a large amount of information on the internet and opinion on the internet that Amazon doesn't have good UX, right? You can do a search and you can find out. And in spite of what Skullcrusher69 might think on some Reddit thread about how terrible the Amazon user experience is, we're doing pretty well, right? Not to say that the ends justifies the means, but we sell a lot of stuff. A lot of people come to our site, and we're doing pretty good. And as a matter of fact, numbers are outdated because of the fact of COVID and everybody being stuck at home. We're actually knocking on the door of $500 billion a year in sales. That's not insignificant. So while there is a lot for us to improve upon in our seller experience, and our customer experience, and our user experience, and our user interface, we seem to be doing all right. And all of that success can be tied to one very specific piece of the Amazon philosophy. And that is, our first commandment is thou shalt know thine customers, right? And what this means is that you really need to understand who you're selling to, what their needs are, and how you can meet those needs. A lot of times you'll hear people say, I'm just going to open a store online, and I'm just going to sell the stuff, and people are going to find it, they're going to love it, and cash is going to start rolling in. And it doesn't always work that way for a number of reasons, right? There's a lot of other people doing similar stuff, selling things similar to yours. So how do you differentiate yourself? And the way you can really differentiate yourself is by not just talking to your customers, but listening to your customers. Like if you work for a company and you've never had a conversation with a customer, a real customer, to hear their opinions and their the way that they feel about how they interact with your goods and services, you're really missing out on something. And there's a lot of different ways to do that, right? This is what we call qualitative information, right? What is the perception of your business and your product? How do people feel about interacting? What emotional response do they get? And there's a number of ways to track this and to engage with customers on this. I'm not going to go through all these. These are from the Norman Nielsen Group, who are kind of the OGs of UX research. And you can go to their site and you can learn a lot more about it. I'm not here to go through each one of these individually. Just know that there's a lot of options that you have, and you really need to be engaging with it. And it's not just for your designers or for your sales team. Everybody that's in your organization that's selling stuff online needs to be a part of these things, at the very least, consuming the output of this research that you're going to conduct. I love bringing engineers, for example, to our user research sessions that we do, and just see the wheels turn, and you can hear it click for them when they hear customers talk about how they perceive different things that have been built by the engineering team. Because as an engineer, sometimes you make trade-offs and you make decisions, and sometimes you do it because it makes your life a little easier. And then when an engineer can hear how a decision that makes your life easier but makes your customer's life more difficult, that changes their perspective on how websites are built and how these experiences are delivered. So that's really, really important. So again, not going to go through all of these, but if you're interested in learning a little bit more, here's a couple of reading suggestions for you. Dr. Susan Weinschneck, I've actually taken a couple of her seminars. She's awesome. This book, 100 Things That Every Designer Needs to Know About People, it's for anybody, not just for designers. And a lot of them you'll read and go, oh, that makes sense. But maybe you've never applied that knowledge to your e-commerce process. And Erica Hall's Just Enough Research is a great place to get started. So, go buy those on Amazon. Actually, buy them from your local bookstore, but don't tell Amazon I said that. Brings us on to commandment number 2. So the follow-on of that is that thou shalt measure, iterate, and optimize. So we talked about the qualitative information that you get from just talking to your customers, but you also have quantitative data that you can gather relatively easy. If you have a website and you're not checking your metrics and the data that's being generated by all the traffic on your site, you're really missing out on a lot of useful stuff. And this is stuff that you shouldn't be checking on occasion, once in a while, certainly not quarterly. You should be checking this stuff daily, at least. In sites at the scale of Amazon, you have people measuring this stuff in real time and responding in real time. Now, I'm not saying that's the way every business should do it. That's costs a lot of money and a lot of person hours in order to do that. But you really need to be up on what's happening on your website, on your e-commerce platform on a regular basis, because you'll learn a lot of interesting stuff. For example, you could see all of a sudden there's a 20% shopping cart abandonment on the second page of our checkout process. Well, that means something's going wrong there. You really need to go and figure out what's happening. Or you could say one landing page is drastically outperforming, the other 5 landing pages that you're driving traffic to. Now, what is it that sets that apart? What can we learn from that instance that we can apply to the other parts of our e-commerce business? So data is incredibly important, because a lot of times people say, all right, I've designed and launched my website, I'm done. We'll just hang out and wait for things to start happening. And your website is never done. Your website is a living, breathing document that you need to take care of and tend to on a regular basis in order to optimize it for the greatest effect. You don't need to do this alone. There's dozens, if not hundreds, of software products, SaaS products out there that can help you do it. Again, not going to go through all of these, and certainly not going to promote one over the other. They all do relatively the same thing. Some do, are more niche players than others, and some of them can be really, really complex. You don't need to dive into the deep end on this. Start small. Like, where are people coming into my website and where are they leaving? And see what you can learn about that. There's a lot of online education that you can find. I know Google Analytics actually has a pretty robust online classes that you can take to figure out how to operate that platform. And there's pretty good education about the other ones too. So find something that works for you. They all have free trials. Do that and figure out what works best for you. Unless you're working at a family-run business and your parents are your boss, never just take what somebody's telling you to do and just accept it without question, right? There's always a way of validating these types of decisions, and that's not to say that you don't make assumptions and test those assumptions, right? So you say, hey, I think that this might happen if we do this to this one product page. Do it, and then use the data to validate it, or even better, disconfirm what your assumption was, and then this way you can react accordingly. So, never try not to make decisions. I shouldn't say never say never, but try not to make decisions regularly without the input from information, whether it's quantitative or qualitative data. All right. Commandment number 3: poor UI is the root of all evil. Your site's got to look good, right? This is the UI stuff. And again, it's not just about looking pretty. It's got to be layered over a sound base of good UX, of good workflows, and things that make logical sense. But the skin of your website is incredibly important. I mean, if we were in person, I would actually do a little quantitative data gathering here and ask everyone who's ever gone to a website and looked around and saw the graphics on it and said, I'm not buying anything from here, raise your hand. My guess is that a number of you are raising your hand right now. You build confidence in just the way you present your business. And statistically, over half of people say that's the most important thing. When they go to an e-commerce site, if they see something that they don't trust visually, they're going to be gone. They're going to go somewhere else where they feel just that the people are paying attention to the details of their UI. And it's really, really an important thing. And it builds the brand. It drives consistency across all of your different marketing channels. There's a lot of things here that are just worth investing in. And, just to throw some more numbers at you, McKinsey actually did a study about companies that put a premium on design as something that they considered core to their beliefs and the way they operated their business. And those companies outperformed all of the other companies that didn't do those types of things. Now, this is Fortune 500, right? Not everybody has the resources to say we're going to hire a head of design and we're going to build a team under them, right? But you need to take that into account. Good design and sensitivity to design decisions equals more money, equals greater profit, right? That's just a fact, right? You just can't argue with it. So you need to really pay attention. Like, don't build a website that your neighbor's cousin's nephew, because they know how to program HTML, like that should not be the quality of your website that you're delivering. Now, maybe he's awesome or she's awesome, and you want to, they're really good at it, and you found a diamond in the rough. But generally, you really need someone who knows what they're doing. You want quality designers who have good experience. Always check people's references, check their portfolio. You want to see a history of good work there, and that's really what's going to drive the success, or help to drive the success of your e-commerce platform. Commandment number 4, and this one really gets overlooked quite a bit. Ignore good copywriting at thine own peril. A lot of times you'll hire a designer or a firm or somebody to build your website, and the people who are doing the design are actually the ones writing the web copy. And that should not, unless you're William Blake, who's great at art and poetry. Generally, artists and writers are not the same people. People who are good visually, they might be okay verbally, but you really need someone who concentrates and their prime skill set is on presenting the underlying value proposition of your website and your products. That's their core job. And the way you do it online is a lot different than the way you may do it in print, right? The way you write a play is different from the way you write a TV screenplay, which is different from the way you might write a book, right? So people who are good at writing web copy understand that the way information is consumed online is a lot different from the way you might consume it looking through a catalog or even being in a store and reading a blurb next to a product that they can touch and feel. They need different types of information. So this is a website called Loaf. They're actually really not, it's not only just a visually pleasing website, but the way they present the information about their products, which is home furnishings, which is not something that everyone might consider buying online, but they do it in such a way they understand what type of information they need to give to their potential buyers that might make them actually pull a trigger on a big ticket item purchase online. How big is it? Is it going to fit where I want it? What if I don't like the fabric? All of these types of things, and you present it in a way where it's very scannable and easily consumable. So go out and find some, or just from your own life, just think about what online websites that you've seen, e-commerce websites that resonated with you, and pay attention to how they do that. But seriously, the copy online, I cannot overstate how important it is. And designers are actually partly to blame here. So this is the second Latin part of the presentation. I'm sure you've all seen or heard of lorem ipsum, right? Where somebody will design something, and because they don't have the final content, they'll just throw some Latin boilerplate text in there, and that doesn't tell you anything about how the site should operate, right? It might look nice, right? Oh, so the design's okay, but it doesn't tell you how it's going to work or anything like that. So, any good designer, maybe they use lorem ipsum at the very first beginning stages of the design process, but very quickly you need actual content, and that's where copywriting comes into the design process, the user experience process. You really need to understand what's the content plan and how it's going to interact with the visuals to deliver the best experience. All right, commandment 5. You got to let your customers search is so important, and it is so frequently not done well. And customers are using it, so often. It's incredibly important to them that they can find what they need very quickly, right? And we spend a lot of time on like information architecture and navigation structures, thinking that the customer's going to click on this button and they're going to go to this page and then follow this menu to here. But if you're talking about a site like Amazon, where you're selling tremendous volume of products, most people don't have the time to follow your navigation structure all the way down to the the 50th click to find the product that they might actually be looking for. So delivering a good search experience is really, really important, and not always done well, right? So customers get really frustrated if they can't find what the products, if they can't use the correct words, so use your search function on your website, and if it doesn't work for you, it's certainly not working for your customers. And that's something that you should always run UX studies on your search function, right? Because you need to know exactly what your customers are searching for, and you can do that quantitatively and qualitatively, right? Because you can get reports on these are the search terms that customers are typing into our search box, or what phrases they're typing into Google or Bing or DuckDuckGo, and driving them to our site, right? And that's really good information that you need to pay attention to, because that's how people are finding you, and then you build upon that so that you can drive them to the right places on your website. So search, incredibly important. All right, this is kind of a niche one. Commandment 6, good product imagery, and something that might get overlooked. So this is a gut-wrenchingly disgusting product called Clamato. I don't know if you've ever heard it, but it is clam and tomato juice, and it is actually as disgusting as it sounds. But if you look at these two pictures side by side, one is clearly much more appetizing than the other one, right? The one on the right, it's a nice picture, it's lit well, it's framed nicely, and if the one on the left looks like what Clamato probably tastes like, but the way you want to present your product and service is in a very nice, a very nice format. And there's a great case study here, right? Airbnb. I know you've all probably heard them. Most of you have probably used them at some point in your life, right? Airbnb was started by a couple of designers, actually went to the same art school that I did. So they had a good design sensibility. And this is one of those companies, if you think back to the McKinsey study, where they consider themselves a design-led organization, and they really let design drive a lot of their decision-making. So not going to go through all the steps in this, how Airbnb started, but I'm going to focus on this little piece down here. So these two guys had this idea after they'd done a bunch of couch surfing in San Francisco. They were going to create this website that allowed people to find places to live online, where people would just put their apartments or their houses up for rent, and people would find them and say, "Oh, I'll stay there." And they launched it, and it really wasn't working. And so they applied their designerly eye to what they had built, and the website was nice, right? It was well designed and everything. But what they realized is that the people who were putting their property up for rent on Airbnb were taking the pictures themselves. Now, I know many of you probably have visited some real estate sites in your life, and it is always very obvious which sites, which homes that are up for sale on those sites, the pictures were taken by the owner versus the pictures that were taken by the real estate agent, or even better, a photographer that the real estate agent is asked to do. So they realized that nobody wanted to rent from them because the places just didn't look good. So these two guys went out and they actually visited all of the places in New York that were for rent on Airbnb, and they took the pictures themselves, put it up there, and that started the growth cycle of Airbnb, because now people could look at it, and not only could they get a better sense of what it was that they were buying, but it also was much more attractive and more appetizing, right? It looked really good. So a good product photography, you know, just don't stand there with your iPhone and take pictures of your stuff you're selling. Like really invest in either a good camera or even better yet, hire someone who knows what they're doing and get good product photos. All right, the mobile customer. So commandment 567. Honor the mobile customer, right? If you just design a website and just throw it up there and say, "Yep, we're good," it's designed for, you know, brand new monitors, which are huge. It looks great when I look at it. You know, I sit at my laptop or I'm on my second monitor at home. You know, I'm not going to bore you with the statistics, or at least not on this slide, with how many people are accessing websites through mobile. But you really need to pay attention to the different form factors that your website needs to that will exist on. So this is Curry's. Not the nicest site in the world, but you know, not bad either. Again, a site selling a tremendous amount of inventory, right? Lots of different product categories, and you can see they have different versions of their site that behave differently on different form factors: a tablet, a mobile. Now, this in many cases you build what's called a responsive website, which will reconfigure itself based on the size of the browser window. So, you know, if it's on a phone, it does something. If it's on a little bit wider screen, it does something. And you can tell a responsive site because if you change the scale, the size of your browser window as you're looking at it, and it starts to reconfigure itself so that it's very legible rather than adding scroll bars, that's a responsive website, right? So they do a really nice job of being responsive. And also this is important because the way people buy things on different form factors is somewhat different. So, you know, search becomes much more important on a mobile device than on a desktop device, for example, because you just don't have enough real estate. And it's a lot of times it's harder to tap than it is to click with a mouse. So, you know, not only does the form factor, the UI need to change as you move from screen size to screen size, but the underlying UX should probably change as well. Yep, and I did say there might be some mobile statistics. Not going to go to it in detail. Obviously, mobile is incredibly important, but I did want to point out one thing down here in the small text. These figures they exclude travel and event tickets. Why? Because not every product and service behaves the same way in e-commerce channels, and you really need to be conscious of what it is you're selling and how it is that people are going to buy it. So obviously travel and event tickets, people tend to be a lot more sensitive to the details of those types of purchases. They want to do a lot more comparison shopping. Obviously travel pictures become a lot more important, Airbnb, for example. So, you know, you really need to, goes back to our first two commandments: understanding your customer and using data to drive your decision-making, right? So don't just automatically assume mobile is going to be our biggest sales channel. Might very well be true, and for many of you probably will be, but you need to know your customer enough to understand whether or not that's true in your case in every instance, right? So just pay attention to the details on that. All right, commandment 8, thou shalt not knowingly deceive thy customer, right? And this is this is like the do not kill of e-commerce commandments. It's a no-brainer, right? You just don't try and lie to your customers. Don't be dishonest with them. And I feel I almost feel guilty using Ryanair because they're a foil for bad UX all the time. And one time I'll tell you a story about the fact that somebody, I was teaching a class actually at DCU, and somebody corrected me on my assumption that Ryanair had bad UX universally. Anyway, the point here, and they're not the only ones that do this. So this was just a screenshot that I found, so I'm using it. But you know, here you are, they tell you to buy travel insurance, but if you do not wish to buy travel insurance, select no travel insurance. They hide it in the drop-down menu, and it's not even alphabetically inserted, right? It's in the L's. It's no travel insurance required between Latvia and Lithuania. Like that's not right. Like, don't do things like that. You know, just don't treat your customers poorly. If your business model is dependent on ripping off your customers, yeah, I don't know what to tell you. Like I personally, I couldn't do stuff like that, right? You know, so just be nice. Treat your customers well, and your customers will treat you well in return. All right. Commandment 9. This is a similar. This is a corollary. Thou shalt not covet thy competitor's website. I have had people, when I was a freelance web developer years and years ago, web designer and developer, come to me and they would say, "Hey, here's a website that I really like. this is what I want you to do. I want you to take that website, put my logo on it, and then we'll just we'll use that as our website. And fortunately, I was never in a position financially where I couldn't tell them, no, there's no way I'm doing that. Right? I had that luxury. But don't just blatantly rip people off. Number one, I mean, it's kind of a fuzzy legal area whether how far copyright applies to web design, but it just doesn't make sense, right? You really want your own brand. You want to build your own brand, and you want people to come to your site for what your value proposition is, not what someone else's is. Now, that said, there's absolutely nothing wrong with saying, hey, you know what? I saw this on this website. I really like the way they do this thing. Or, these 3 websites is where we should be getting our inspiration from. Are our competitors? Let's do a competitive analysis and see what they're up to. Like, all of that is fair game, and that absolutely makes sense. Great book, Steal Like an Artist by Austin Kleon. If you have a couple minutes, you'll read it in a day or two. It's a good read. But yeah, like don't bad artists borrow and great artists steal. Like, just be careful about the way you do it. You want to be sensitive. You want to be respectful, and you want to be your own brand. Like, that's really important. Like, stealing is a way to really destroy your brand. Now, that said, there is a lot of to be said about the stupidity of the way software patents are run globally, certainly in the country that I'm in. They've patented things that are like, you may remember a while back where there was a big fight over the patent over Flash, back when Flash was still a thing, because somebody patented the idea of a plugin. Like, nobody in their right mind would have ever come up with the way of extensible programs for web content delivery. It was just like, it was really, really crazy. So you always need to be aware of intellectual property online. You don't want to blatantly rip things off, but I do think it's a little overwrought. That said, I'm not a lawyer, so use your best judgment. Don't take my word for it. All right, and we're almost at the end here. So final commandment: thou shalt follow no other commandments before these. So I'll tell you a little quick story. Actually, I was working in Dublin at the time, and one of our clients came to us and wanted us to help them build out a huge e-commerce website. Great job, really, really excited to do it. But we had a 2-month argument over the fold, what needed to be above the fold. And this was a little while ago, so websites weren't as big as they are now, because we were talking about smaller screen sizes. So we had like 1024 by 768 pixel densities that we were designing for, and there were like 50 elements. And every time they came with another requirement, they're like, oh, and this has to be above the fold. Oh, and this has to be above the fold, because their belief was that was all people ever saw. Nobody ever went down below the fold, and that was just patently untrue. And it was just an ongoing argument about, we can't put everything. Yeah, your primary call to action, your navigation, of course, you want that at the top of the screen, but you can't have everything there. And as a matter of fact, if you have everything there, you're actually going to make a worse experience for your customers, and they're going to leave because they're being overwhelmed. So, long story short, we use data to validate our assumptions and research to validate that we didn't need to have everything above the fold. So that's great. There's a great site called UX Myths. You should go there and check it out. They kind of catalog all these things. Just a few of them to just give you a taste. I'm sure many of you have heard the 3-click rule. Like, you should never be 3 clicks away from any piece of information on the website, or the scroll that we just talked about, or the last one, like, oh, you know what? You buy this product, so just design for yourself, because you're just like your users. And all 3 of those are nonsense. We talked about the scrolling, but it's 3 clicks is a ridiculously arbitrary number. Really, you just want to reduce the number of clicks that takes people to get where they want. And you are decidedly not your users, because you know so much about your product and service that your users don't, that if you are making decisions for yourself, you're really putting them in a bind. Like, they may be beginner users and you're an expert, and you can't apply the same set of expectations to both of those users. So, and as a matter of fact, I would say not only should you question these, you should question everything that I just told you. Like, don't believe what I'm telling you. Go out and research it for yourself. And there's a number of reasons for that, right? One is because you might be in a niche vertical where the requirements that your users have are very specific, right? And they may fly in the face of some of the things I told you. Also, technology changes very, very rapidly, not just monthly or weekly, but daily in some cases. And a new technology may come out that may obviate some of the other things I tell you. So, be very skeptical of things that you hear that are absolutely and violently true, because odds are they're not. Do your research and use your data to back you up. So those are our 10 commandments, just about done, and I think relatively good time. As any mass wraps up, I will take this opportunity to tell you, this is my body, this is my blood, go in peace, and yada, yada, yada. It's been a lot of fun. And now if anyone is still paying attention and awake, I am happy to take questions. And I'd like to thank you for your time. It's been great.
Right, thank you very much. That was fantastic. Thanks, Mark.
Sure.
And I think we've received a number of questions, which I'd like to straight away. But if for our audience, if you haven't asked any questions yet, please do so in the next few minutes using, as I said, the Q&A functions. So first question to Mark, what are your favorite methods for of gathering qualitative data? I've heard customer surveys are ideal, but what about focus groups?
Yeah, so honestly, it depends on what you're trying to accomplish and what stage in your design process are. So focus groups are great when you have open-ended questions, right? What products or service should we be investing in? How should our business be behaving? What are our sales channels? What are our marketing channels? So if you are really in the early stages of your decision-making process, focus groups are good to point you in the right direction. As you get into more mature parts of that sales funnel or your business development, you'll be able to focus down more on individual questions. In those cases, once you have a prototype, for example, just doing individual usability tests where you walk individuals through your prototype to get feedback on different parts of the, on screens or on the workflow itself, become very, very effective. There are channels like, online surveys become very useful for existing customers, right? So you really need to gauge how much information you already have that you're comfortable with and where you are in terms of the design of your e-commerce website. We'll use that as the framework, and what specific questions you need to have answered. So before you really make that decision, write down your questions, and those questions, depending on how specific or unspecific they are, will help you to understand how, what types of research you need to engage in.
Brilliant. Another one here. What are your thoughts on starting out designer or off the shelf or template when it comes to e-commerce design?
I'm sorry, what kind of template, Salam?
Is it should we go for designer or off the shelf template? I mean, I think the question is related to design.
Yep.
Do we use a ready template or?
Right. So this is budget dependent. I'm a designer. I think designers are very good at what they do, and there's a reason designers exist. That said, I know everybody's budget probably doesn't allow them that luxury of going out and hiring a designer, nevertheless a design agency. So I would say this: if your budget requires you to start with an off-the-shelf template, by all means begin there. But I would have a plan for customizing it and iterating on it over time. And that might involve engaging with small amounts of a freelancer's time, somebody who's done e-commerce or web design in the past. So you don't have to pay them, for large blocks of their time, but maybe you put them on retainer for a couple of hours a month so that, they can make sure that it's branded properly. So that as you get quantitative data in, you can make updates according to the data, and that person can help you. And then at some point down the road, if it's grown according to your expectations, you can then flip the switch and go from an off-the-shelf solution to a more bespoke custom one.
Great. Any recommended platform for low-cost usability testing for SMEs?
No cost. Listen, I would say the cheapest way to do it is to find a user and invite them out for a cup of coffee, right? And have a conversation with them. Like if you're looking for a really low cost, find people who would be in your target market or an actual user and do it that way. Listen, you'll be like SurveyMonkey is pretty cost effective. There's ways of doing it. Again, I think the level of detail that you require will dictate what platform works best for you. So if you're a more robust business and you're really trying to delve down into really significant details, you might want to spend the extra amount of money for a more robust platform. But again, if you're just starting out, survey, like I said, go to a SurveyMonkey or a Zoho or something and just set up a quick questionnaire and use that to get started with. Any research is better than no research. That's what I would say.
Right. Good advice. Another question. What was the resources you mentioned for debunking user experience myths? And what other resources would you recommend for learning more about best practices?
Yeah, so there's a ton of people on like Twitter and people who are quote unquote subject matter experts. If you have a question, a lot of them tend to be really friendly and open to helping people out. Certainly find someone who would be willing to answer a question or point you in the direction of a good answer. Find other designers with experience. I mean, I know on LinkedIn, I get contacted quite a bit from young designers, and I'm always happy to take a couple minutes out and talk to them if they have a problem, help them arrive at a decision or tell them where they can get more information. There's not one source of truth here. I would think, you want to build up a community of people and engage with them to build that, to reinforce the relationships that you're really interested in this space, and then people will repay that back to you. And they'll sharing information. The one thing I will say about the UX community online is it tends to be pretty friendly and pretty open. So yeah, I would not hesitate about reaching out to people on social media.
All right.
Oh, and I'm sorry, Salam. And books,
yeah.
Read books and figure out what makes sense to you and use that to build frameworks for how you think about these things. Like, again, people have their own experiences and they've worked on their own projects, and that's great to get insight from them, but every project is unique. And if you really want to be your own designer, you need to concentrate more on how to think rather than what to think.
Right. Another question, because creating a great user experience seems to be such time-intensive process. So what should you start, when should you start testing your user interface?
I would say from day one. I wouldn't even begin the design phase until I have a foundation of questions that I need answers to, and understanding of how I'm going to get those answers. Now, you could do the design phase and the research phase in parallel for a while, but eventually you're going to hit a point in the design phase where you're going to start making decisions that are going to really have knock-on effects to further decisions down the road. And if you're making those without the benefit of any understanding of the user or what their needs are, it becomes very difficult to backtrack. I think it's before I would even engage in deep design, I would start figuring out who my users are, where do they live, how can I get access to them? Like, that's how I think every project should start, with those three questions.
That's great. Another question is then related to the ethical issues. Do you think these GDPR and upcoming governmental issues need to be taken in considerations now by website design?
Oh, so is that GDPR?
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely, right. And I think, as a consumer, I think that these are great things. As a user, the fact that I have to click the cookie, accept all cookie button on every single website I choose gets a little annoying from time to time. And as a designer, it puts limitations on some of the things that we can do. Now, keep in mind our commandment 8, which is, don't engage in dark patterns or deceptive patterns, right? Don't be mean to your users. In that sense, protecting users' privacy and a user's right to control their own data, to me, is inviolate. I think Apple actually is ahead of the curve here, and they're doing some good things. And I think using that as a model is a good thing going forward, right? And users should have the option to to opt in to share segments of their data that they're comfortable with that could improve their experience or make their access to meaningful content easier or more I guess more frequent, right? There is a end user benefit to a certain amount of information sharing, but it is definitely up to each user to make that decision. So as designers, we need to be very sensitive to that and be very clear and transparent in how those decisions are made so that users can make the right decisions on where they want to share their data and what data they want to share.
Right. That's brilliant. Another question is there. You've mentioned a couple of books, but any book recommendations, specific books for user experience design or that you've recommend?
Yep. So Steve Krug, Don't Make Me Think is great. Design of Everyday Things is the Bible of user experience design. I mean, you could start there. There's millions of them, but like those are two really good ones. The two that I shared, I think are also great because they're very accessible as well. Sometimes design books can be really interesting for designers once you have the knowledge base to understand the way design works or how people perceive design. So I'd start slow and find some introductory books if you don't have experience with design that can kind of inform you about what parts of the design process you want to experience more of, and then take it from there. But yeah, Everyday Things is great, and Don't Make Me Think, also good starter books.
That's great. That's great. I have a concern here regarding actually this question for myself. Recently, we know what we call social commerce. It's it's due to the use of social media. And do you think the social commerce will change the way how we do the user experience or the design of the e-commerce websites?
Yeah, Salam, I go back and forth on this a lot. When I worked back in advertising, that was when Facebook was kind of just getting off the ground, and Twitter and everything, and people were like, "Oh, this is going to change, the way everything works, and it's going to build communities all across the world." And then the way it manifested itself was a lot different. The utopian promise of social media never really materialized, and it became a tool to that people could leverage, not just for good, but for other purposes as well. So I think social media is going to go through a reckoning on how they use people's data and the types of information that they allow to promulgate in their networks. And I think users are going to have a lot to do with this on what platforms are you going to spend time on and give your data to, and what are you going to get in return for that? And I'm not going to pretend to have an answer to that question. I think there's potential for good there. I think there's certainly for brands a lot of good opportunities that do exist to help build communities around brand awareness. When we started in social media marketing, we used to have these ideas like oh, there's a ketchup brand, and people are going to want to be friends with the ketchup brand on Facebook, and we're going to build a community of 50,000 people. People like ketchup, but do people really care what a ketchup brand thinks about what's happening in the world? So I think brands need to know their place in the overall consumer ecosystem. The platforms themselves need to get a lot better in how they manage their user bases and the information that gets circulated in them, and the consumers themselves and the people who are on social media need to be a lot more specific about what their expectations are for how those platforms and those brands are behaving and what they're doing with the data that they're giving them. So it's there's a flywheel there that I think hasn't been really figured out yet.
Interesting. And also I think a couple of years back, Amazon has launched Amazon Spark.
Yep.
They're trying to develop a kind of social commerce platform, but a few years after that, I think they stopped the service. So, was that related to user experience?
So I don't know the exact reason why it was, but I can tell you this about Amazon. Amazon invests an incredible amount of money in ideas all the time, and the majority of them fail. And Amazon is absolutely okay with that. So if you think back to the graph I showed about Amazon's income and their net valuation, how much money they're actually profit they're making, that was very low. We're making $500 billion a year, but maybe 25 is in profit. And the reason why is because Amazon pumps so much of that money that they bring in back into these ideas, because that's how that's how we believe we're going to build the brand, and we're going to build other useful things for people. So that's where AWS came from, right? For example, cloud computing was something that they built for themselves because they couldn't find the infrastructure to support Amazon.com. So they reinvested the money into that. Alexa came out of how do we make it easier for people to buy things, and how do we empower people to interact with their environment? So it came out of that. Now the Kindle, obviously, to sell more books, but the Fire phone was a tremendous failure, right? They launched that, they were going to build their own phone. So Amazon is very comfortable with failure because the successes that they have tend to be outsized because they're not afraid to take risks. Now, not every company has that financial capacity or that even philosophy to do that. But for the brands and the companies that do, that's why you'll see things come and go. It happens with Google quite a bit as well. And people are like, well, why did that happen? And honestly, because it just no longer fit in what their vision for the company was in most cases.
Interesting, thank you. I think we've come to the end of the session. Before wrapping up, I'd like to thank Mark for taking the time to give us the insightful and interesting talk, and to all of you for joining us and for your questions as well. GETDigital will continue with our next session featuring Ivan Fishkin, partner at Logic in Bonn, who will be focusing on a deep dive in SEO. This will be at 15:44. So my final thanks to Mark. Thank you very much, and goodbye to everyone.
Thanks, Salam. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.